he said to me, you know, Barry, how you take initiative and you develop ideas and you participate in meetings. And he was really noting that I had moved up in the organization, and that was a good thing. He said, when you're CEO, you have to do those things if you say them out loud. So be careful what you say.
Hi, I'm Becky. Welcome to Short Story Long. In this podcast, we discuss ways you can integrate who you are into how you lead. My guest today is Barry Moline. He is a longtime CEO with nearly 3 decades of experience leading teams and shaping organizational culture across business, government, and trade associations. A Cialdini certified trainer, he teaches the principles of ethical influence and effective leadership. Barry is the award-winning author of Connect, a book that reveals how to build great culture and highly collaborative teams. He now speaks and consults nationwide, helping leaders bring people together to achieve extraordinary results. He focuses on enhancing leadership, building great teams, ethical influence and persuasion, and AI leadership strategy. Thank you, Barry, for joining the podcast today. It's a pleasure to have a chance to have a conversation with you today.
Becky, it's great to be with you on Short Story Long.
Yeah, it's really wonderful to be able to talk about some of the things that we'll talk about today. And I'm hoping that there's something that everyone can really draw away from the experiences that you've had. So as we get started here today, do you mind just sharing a little bit about kind of that crux of the inflection point that we'll explore?
Yeah, I've had a few of these experiences in my life where I volunteered for something and I found that it led to something else that was better. But I had no idea at the beginning and zero expectation that anything good was ever going to happen. There was a time when I was working in Washington, D.C. for a national trade association, and I was a junior level analyst. I ended up working there for about 5 years, and I rose up in the ranks at a staff meeting. So all hands meeting, 80 people. Right toward the end, the woman who sat 2 doors down from me, Arsenio, was giving an update on the holiday party. So this was around September timeframe, and she was looking for volunteers to be on a committee that would plan the holiday party and some activities and so on. And she said, who would like to be on that committee? And no one raised their hand.
I'm really shocked by this, Barry. I mean, typically everyone wants to be on a committee like that, right?
Yeah, right. Well, you know, sometimes it can be kind of fun, but being a part of the holiday party was like, oh, geez, you know, I don't need to spend my time doing that. So there was a pause. It felt like a long time. I was looking at the room and I was looking at my friend Arsenio up there, and I felt, I don't know, bad. And I thought, what the heck? You know, the holiday party is not that big of a deal to me. I'll raise my hand. So I raised my hand. And she said, oh, Barry will be on the committee. And then there was a little bit of a shorter pause, and someone else raised their hand. And then one other person raised their hand. And we had 4 people now. And Arsenio said, that's great. We've got a committee. We'll meet next week. So it turns out that at our first meeting, the CEO of the company came. And he just sat down with us like he was a member of the committee. And he came to all of the planning meetings. And we had very, vibrant, colorful conversations about the various activities. It turned out he just loved the holiday party and he wanted everybody to have a good experience. I think he saw it as a teamwork adventure for everyone. And, it just meant something to him in a variety of ways.
Yeah. I'm curious, as you describe that, you're not expecting him to show up at this meeting. And so I wonder a little bit if everyone in that staff meeting would have known that they would have had FaceTime with the CEO, how many of the people in that staff would have actually raised their hands to be part of that committee.
I'll bet you that if people knew that the CEO was going to be on the holiday party planning committee, at least half the room would have raised their hands. And it may have been more. It may have been 3/4 because no one knew that there was going to be. And it wasn't just FaceTime for one particular meeting. We had, I don't know, 7 or 8 meetings. They weren't always long, but they covered a particular topic. We prepped for them. What games are we going to do at the holiday party? What kind of decorations are we going to have? I mean, they were little things, but they were meaningful to everyone, and they were meaningful to him. Still, the point is that no one knew, and therefore no one raised their hands. Maybe that was part of his plan. I don't know. That's kind of an interesting perspective on it.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I think about with stuff like that is we raise our hands to do things, maybe to help a friend out who's a couple of doors down, maybe for a variety of different reasons. When you think about the exposure that you would have had, because you describe yourself as a relatively junior analyst at the time, how much FaceTime, how much shoulder rubbing time did you actually have with executive leadership, much less a CEO in that role prior to that?
It was very limited, I would say. I definitely interacted a lot with my boss, who was sort of 3 levels down from the CEO. But I wasn't getting a lot of FaceTime with the CEO.
Yeah, it's hard to get that when you are staff level in an organization. And, part of what I'm hearing is that you weren't expecting it. That's obvious. And others likely were not either. And the other element of this is it's also not, it's work related, but it isn't the business that we're in. It's something that he's passionate about. So when you think about the relationship that was formed with him, how would you describe that connection with him through that planning process?
Yeah, what you're describing is not a formal work relationship where there's a hierarchy, because he made it clear that he was just one of the members of the committee and he wanted to hear from everyone. He wasn't leading the group. Arsenio was leading the group. He was just a participant. So he wanted to hear everyone's opinions, and he was just one vote. So there was the relationship that we developed was much more of a collegial one, colleagues. I hesitate to call it friendship, but there's no question that it was at that level of friendship where it was like, oh, that's an interesting idea. Let's hear from everyone about their ideas. And he was fine with that. He wanted to be, an equal part of the group. He didn't want to supersede anyone's decision. So that was really unique to be able to get to know the CEO at that level over a series of very small meetings on a completely separate topic than work.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the things that it makes me think about with that is just one, with the repetition of it, there becomes a comfort. Like one time it's like, okay, it's a one-off, whatever. But doing that over the course of time, you get to know someone a little bit during that time. It's not just, oh, well, he says his vote doesn't matter more than others, but does it or does it not? You start to see that pattern develop, and there's a trust within that relationship. Look, it could have been a distrust if things had gone horribly awry. But the way that you describe it is, then the party happens. It's a successful party, and people enjoyed it. What happened in that relationship after the holiday planning and the holiday party event?
There was a lesson that I learned just from the experience of meeting in that group, and that is when we had I don't know if I'd call it a disagreement, but we had a variety of ideas and we weren't sure exactly what to do, or let's just say how many games we were going to participate in as a staff and how we were going to know if people were getting bored or what it might be. And on every element, we had this criterion, this question that we asked, which was, what's our goal for this part of the holiday party? And that idea, asking that question, is something that stuck with me my entire career. In every meeting, on every project, it's when we get off track, it's what's our goal here? What are we trying to do? Of course, we want to understand what that goal is at the beginning, but nevertheless, we did that in something as, silly as the holiday party.
Yeah.
And I saw that in action. That was what the thing was, is that we interacted, all of us together, when we were getting a little off track on kind of what we might call silly things, but we still did it. And as a young analyst, in the workforce, it had an impression on me. How do we resolve issues? Oh, well, let's focus on our big goal. And is that decision or that idea get us closer to the goal or farther from the goal? So that helped us. It helped us prioritize.
And to your point, too, there's the element there of, you had said it at the start at the beginning, you say, what is our goal here? You go into a meeting, you go into a planning discussion, whatever it might be. What is our goal here? What is meaningful about the distinction, I think, that you're making here is that maybe the conversation starts to go a little bit off course. Maybe you're breaking it down into segments, like you were talking about with the holiday party. What's the goal of this piece? What's the goal of this piece? And it's chunking it in a way. And one of the things that it makes me think about is how valuable it is to be able to come back. Things are sort of scattered, and it's like, what is our goal here? And it may have changed, and is a really great orienting process to be able to say, these are the things that we've discovered. Is this still our goal? And so it doesn't even need to be keeping us focused on the same thing. It actually gives an opportunity to say, we can stay on course or we can adjust our course based upon what we have discovered in this conversation that we've had. Yeah, so I love that, and I'm glad that you added that in.
Yeah, we want to be serendipitous, and we also want to let the ideas flow. And then when that trickles down, then we say, okay, what's most important here? Yeah. Agree. So you asked that question.
Yes, about what happened after. Yes, absolutely. Because you have this nice event where you've had a chance to work alongside the CEO in this. Sometimes that relationship just sort of floats away after that. And other times, like I believe in yours, it didn't exactly do that.
Exactly. In January, he just showed up one day at the door of my office, which itself was unusual because the way he managed was through notes. And in those days, we barely had email. So he would leave a note, or his assistant would come and deliver a note and say, Larry would like to meet with you today at 4. And that was sort of the way that they rolled. He just showed up at my door and said, Barry, do you have a minute? And I thought, yeah. And I just had, two emotions, like, uh-oh, and like, hey, it's Larry.
Right.
Because we were just a couple of weeks ago, we were holiday party planning. So I was really unsure about what it was about. So he came in and he sat down in my little chair, and he said, I really enjoyed working with you on the holiday party, and I noticed that you were the kind of person that had a lot of ideas, and you weren't shy about sharing them. He said, we have a conference every June, and it's a big conference where 2,000 people come from all around the country. They're from electric utilities and very senior people. He said, we hire a famous person. So at the time, I think the person that was going to speak was General Colin Powell.
Okay.
And they would hire national news figures that were famous at the time. A sort of a conveyor belt of famous people. He said, we're paying tens of thousands of dollars for these people to come and give us a presentation for about 45 minutes. And then we open it up to Q&A. And I don't know what it is, he said, but we've got 2,000 people and no one asks the first question. But once they do, then the ideas start flowing and people get up the nerve to ask the question. I need someone to ask that first question. Would you come to this national conference and ask the first question? And I thought, like, hell yeah. but I said, absolutely, Larry. Yes, I can do that. And he
I'm
said,
here
you'll
for
have
you.
other responsibilities at the meeting. It's a 5-day meeting. There'll be plenty of other things to do, but I need you to do that. And I said, absolutely. And I'll make sure that it's relevant to what he's talking about. And he said, yeah, just let's get the party started, get the questions flowing, and then other people will stand up.
And how insightful he is to recognize that it's one thing to fall and then others will follow. It's also interesting, the parallel to me, that after the 10-second pause at that staff meeting where you said, okay, right, like, sure, I'll go in. Then it was a shorter pause and other people jumped in to participate in the holiday planning as well, where it just becomes, yes, Barry says, sure, I'll do that. And then other people start to recognize, oh, well, if someone can do it, then I can do it. I can say yes as well. And it really starts to show that people really want to see someone else have the courage of their conviction or the courage to say yes before they kind of lean into doing that same thing. Interesting parallel.
Yeah, that is a great observation. I never thought about that. And it is true that you just have to have somebody willing just to take the first step and then others follow. And they're very close to follow. So it's not just like get in line right behind that person, but initiative is important to get the ball rolling.
Exactly. Yes.
So I did that every year for 5 years at this big conference. And of course, there were actually 2 large general sessions at every meeting. So we were hiring 2 speakers that of national renown. And, I was the one that was getting the ball rolling at those meetings. And then in the meantime, at my regular job there, I was moving up. I hadn't really thought much about the concept of being, a preferred child or anything like that. I'm sure that was part of it. I was known to the CEO and other people in the organization took note of me, but I was making regular progressions. So I didn't really, I just didn't shoot up to be a vice president, suddenly. But nevertheless, I was getting promotions, and that was, I think they were merited. So after 5 years, the job of the CEO opened up at a smaller organization in Florida, and it did similar work to what our association did in Washington, D.C. And the reason why they called me to see if I was interested in the job was because they had attended all those meetings over the last 5 years, and they saw that I was that first person to get up and ask a very important person an intelligent question, hopefully. And they said, we need somebody like Barry who will stand up for us and make our case. That didn't get me the job. That got me noticed to get an interview. So I had to compete with other people. Nevertheless, in their minds, they had the notion that I was a person who took initiative. And I did get that job.
Yeah, and they had a sense of who you were. He's a curious guy who is listening and is willing to ask questions to get clarity, which those are really great leadership characteristics, to be able to have initiative, to be curious, to stand up when others have not yet stood. And so, yeah, those are the kinds of things, and they're different things for different scenarios and different situations, right? But one of the things that you said there really strikes me, which is I didn't get hired because of that. I got noticed because of that. And you don't get tapped until you get noticed.
Yeah, that is true. It's important not so much to make a big splash, but at least be consistently out there doing the good thing that you do.
Right, right. Doing quality work, which was the merit for your progression in your career, but also catching the eye and the attention of leadership, so that, because he didn't just have you do it for the first year. If it were just, well, Barry seems like a nice guy, we'll have him do it this year, it would have been year one. But to have you do that for consecutive years means that there was also merit to the questions, and they saw a value in your presence, not only for doing that initial question kind of task, but I'm sure for all of the other things that they were tapping you to do for that as well. And I think what's really important to really point out in this is how much these small moments can build up over time, so that you get recognition for things that were always there. You were always that same guy. And this is a demonstration of those moments where you might have stepped outside of your norm in order to do something kind for someone, right? It wasn't, hey, I'm going to do this so that I can be with the CEO. You didn't know that. What you knew was, my friend needs a little bit of help. I might as well help her out. Oh gosh, here's the CEO. I guess I'll chat with him. And it becomes this layering of opportunity that without that first flip, and to your point of, it doesn't need to be a big thing. You raised your hand to help organize the holiday party. And it's not the thing that most people are clamoring to do. And so it wasn't a big splash moment. It was really a small splash moment that turned into a momentous shift.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's fascinating to break it down, because when you break it down like this, what it shows is that we have so many opportunities to do these kind of things almost every day.
Yes.
You said help a neighbor, whatever it might be. It's hard to describe. We don't know where some action that we're going to take, some initiative we're going to take, is going to have a positive impact somewhere on either someone else's life, and because everyone's going through something, or on our lives. And even if it doesn't have a sort of a demonstrable effect on our lives, it does in terms of the pattern. I did this, it felt good. At least it felt good. Maybe yes. I didn't notice anything particularly good come out of it, but that's who I am. That's the kind of person I am. I help others out, Yeah. And so you never know what the result is going to be. In this case, I can see that through line from literally just raising my hand to help out my colleague to being noticed for a CEO job that I never planned to apply for. But because they saw me, they said, you're the kind of person that we'd like to have.
And also, you're the kind of person, not you're the kind of skill sets. You had that too. But other people might have had those skill sets, but they weren't you, which is why they come to you and they say there are these characteristics, there are these traits of who you are as a human that makes it interesting to us to have that technical kind of conversation. And to your earlier point, it is not that every single time we raise our hand to do a kind thing for someone else that we get kudos or a CEO opportunity out of it. I think all probably know that in our heart of hearts. And sometimes there are those moments when we raise our hands and it's a little awkward and it's not as nice as the CEO releases hierarchy. I'm curious, have you had other moments in your life where it maybe didn't go quite as smoothly as this one did?
It's funny that when I became the CEO, so I interviewed, got the CEO job, and honestly, and I haven't admitted this hardly ever, but
no one's
really
listening. It'll be fine.
Yeah, it's okay.
It's just you and me.
I really wasn't ready to be a CEO, and in fact, at the job where I was working, I wasn't a vice president. I was a department director, and that's where I had rose up to. But even still, I wasn't really ready in my mind to be a CEO. I didn't know everything that it would entail. And the way that I got a little tip off before I started was when I got the job, and then the guy that was the CEO, Larry, he retired, and we got a new CEO, and who was also a good person. He said to me, Barry, how you take initiative and you develop ideas and you participate in meetings. And he was really noting that I had moved up in the organization, and that was a good thing. He said, when you're CEO, you have to do those things if you say them out loud. So be careful what you say. And
great advice.
And the conversation was a little longer than that, because he wanted to share, experiences in his life where he had to be careful about what he said. And he said, listen to people, let them say things, and be curious and talk through ideas, but don't commit to things until you've really thought about them. Because when you say, oh, wow, that's a great idea, or that's a direction I want to go, whatever it might be, people take that as the gospel. So just be careful. So that combined with, going from managing, 4 people to managing 15 people and having a significantly larger budget and way bigger impacts and so on. I really wasn't ready for it in the sense that I just didn't know what it would take. So I had sort of a paradigm shift. I had to look at this new landscape in front of me and say, not so much what have I gotten myself into, but it's more like, I've gotten myself into something. Let me figure this out. And the hardest part of that entire experience, and I think this isn't just a new CEO, but I think it's just being a new manager. It's finding somebody. And it could be, 2 people, but usually it's just one, because there's not that many. Just somebody to talk to who wouldn't judge, who I could ask dumb questions of and try to figure things out. And so I finally found that person. And I, it wasn't easy, but I did, some testing of a few people just to see how they'd respond. And then my life got a lot better because I could have private conversations, and we did these mostly over extended lunches, and it wasn't just like, what do I do here and what do I do there? It was like, here's some things that I'm thinking about. Help me think through this before I sort of let it out to the world, or before I share it with others and we brainstorm. I just want to make sure that I'm at least a little bit on track. And the person that I confided in, his name is Fred, was just a great counselor. He was very good at just, let's step back and take a look at the various pros and cons and see what we can figure out. He didn't have all the answers, and I didn't have all the answers, but at least we sort of laid out the image on the landscape.
Yeah, it's really having that sounding board in that moment to be able to talk it through. And to your point, it's not only CEOs. In fact, what I find is that emerging leaders and new managers in particular, they don't know what they know, and they don't know what they don't know. And so one of the things that happens in the work that I've ever done, whether it was my HR career or as in coaching, was helping them sort out, how do you know that? Do you know that that's true, or do you just think that's true? Is that a belief that you have? And if so, where is it grounded, and where's the limit to that? And then as management and leadership goes up that ladder, whatever that looks like for anyone's career, because most of the time it's not exactly the same, it becomes, how does that shift as you get more and more senior? Someone could say, look, as a deputy director, you were still leading a team. Budgets don't matter, size of teams don't matter. I disagree with those comments, but people will say that sometimes. But it's, to your point, it's that shift in perspective of who am I and who am I seen to be? in these moments where me showing initiative when I'm a staff level or a lower level leader within the organization is taken in one way. But then when you have that same initiative as a leader, then people are saying, well, Barry's got all the ideas. He doesn't need us to say anything, right? If it's positioned incorrectly, it's now you've become the dictator, not the guy who has initiative. But in your mind, you can think of yourself as the same guy because you are. It's your impact and the footprint that you leave every time you step into a discussion with people. And having sounding boards where people go, yeah, so how did that actually go for you when you said it that way? And you go, yeah, it was kind of great. Or, oh my gosh, it was an absolute disaster. And okay, let's peel back and figure out what was going on there so that you can see it through an objective lens. Because so often when we do that inside of our own heads, the stories that we come up with are tragedies. They're never the really beautiful heroics that can happen out of that. It's usually the, oh my gosh, I'm the worst person ever kind of scenario. And what I'm hearing you say is you found this guy who could really help you. And you said you went through a couple of people with that. Barry, I think people would be really interested to know, how is it that you came to discover that Fred was your guy for that?
Well, I had private conversations with a variety of people. And what I found was that I got the feeling that they weren't all on my side, I guess. Or maybe another way to say that is non-judgmental. Their response would be, well, that would be a total failure. So, I mean, we're just brainstorming an idea. And they're jumping to the conclusion of implementation when I'm just saying, I wonder how to approach this. And as opposed to saying, okay, here's an idea. I think there's probably 3 to 5 other ways to approach it. And have you thought about any of those ways? And that concept there, just, letting the flower bloom or other flowers bloom and then considering what other ideas might be. The people that I found that were not as much of a good fit were just a little more closed-minded. They didn't have as much of a growth mindset as I did. I was interested in learning and understanding as much as possible. And they were more focused on, okay, Barry wants to do this. Not sure that's such a good idea. And they didn't see a bunch of other ideas that could be in front of us.
Yeah. And in that, it's someone who will join you in the exploration rather than feeling like they are supposed to give you advice. It's one of the things as a coach I find all of the time is, and I say to people all the time, I don't care what you choose. I'm not vested in what choice you ultimately make because it's yours to make. I'm vested in having you feel comfortable as you make that decision, that it feels right, or it feels like the best of the worst, if that's all you have to go from. But it's the right thing for you to do as your first step going forward. And to be in a place where you're CEO and you're new to the shoes, if you will, and people are telling you, well, that's good, bad, or indifferent, that isn't very helpful, is really what I'm hearing you say, what you really wanted and needed. And I would also say that this is true again for all the levels, is what you need is actually someone who challenges your thinking as opposed to puts you into a different box or holds up a stop sign and says, you can't do that. I don't know about you, but when people tell me I can't do something is exactly when I want to prove that I can. And that isn't always in my best interest either. And so our ability to be able to have someone listen to us, and that's one of the reasons that I wanted to kind of dig into what was it about him that made him your person for that part of your life at that time, because that also changes sometimes as well. Like he may not be your guy forever. He's your guy for right now.
So I was a CEO of 2 trade associations, and the members of the trade associations were large electric utilities. I dealt with the CEOs of those electric utilities. Those are the people, my counterparts. And I can tell you that as I got to know those CEOs, they were as insecure as anyone else just walking down the street. Yeah, they had a lot of responsibility and a lot of financial oversight, but individually, everybody has something going on in their lives. They also had things going on in their lives, and they weren't always good things. And they needed somebody to talk to, and they too had difficulty finding people to talk to. So I was their confidant. I was sort of modeling my experience in the past of, having had a positive mentor and someone that I was comfortable talking with. So I can just tell you that it's everywhere. That issue is everywhere. And it's not just at the CEO level. It's literally at every level. It's valuable to try to find someone to talk with that doesn't judge, a good coach, a good mentor, and at every step of the way in almost every area of your life.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I know to be true is that idea that work and life cross over all of the time. We talk about work-life balance, but the fact of the matter is they're integrated from the very get-go. And life happens even while you're at work. And work happens during your life sometimes. And it's how we manage that back and forth. And when I first started as an executive and leadership coach, I thought, nope, it's just work-related stuff. I don't want to get into people's lives. I don't have a place there. And it took me, I think, months. It did not take long for me to recognize, well, that's just dumb. Even when I was in human resources and I was on the corporate side of their life, I had people coming in talking about exactly the kinds of things that you were talking about. They would come in, they would sit in my office, and we would talk about, this is what's going on in my life. These are the things that I'm dealing with, and I don't feel like I'm showing up at work in the same way that I did before or in the way that I want to because I'm so distracted by X, Y, and Z. And maybe they weren't showing up that well. And so how is it that you talk to your leader? How is it that you talk to your board to say, this is what's going on. This is what's happening for me. And ideally, those leaders would be understanding and flexible and things like that. But knowing whether or not they are flexible or not is way better than wondering whether or not they are, because then you know what you're dealing with. And if they're going to be rigid, then you know what that expectation bar looks like. And if you have no idea, then you might be doing a lot more than what you actually have to in terms of those integrations. You might have some flexibility, some openness that's there that doesn't have you driving yourself into the ground in those moments. So I absolutely appreciate what you're talking about with that for sure. I'm curious, when you were a CEO later, how did some of these lessons show up for you as you were leading these organizations?
I became much more of an observer of situations before I responded than I was reactionary. And unless there was an emergency, and if there was an emergency, and that was part of what I was responsible for in Florida. When you look at the Weather Channel during a hurricane, I was responsible for getting all those trucks on the road and have them drive into Florida to restore power. That was an emergency. And, working at the emergency control center, in the Capitol, and working with high-level officials and the governor and so on, and making sure we had enough line workers to restore power. So those were emergencies when you just have to act and you don't have time to think. But even though things are moving fast, there's still a little bit of time to gather your thoughts and figure out what the best solutions are. Actually, in those kind of situations, we would rehearse. We would literally practice. We know we're going to be in a tense environment and we wouldn't have time to make decisions. So we would practice a the actions we would need to take in a hurricane a month before a hurricane would strike with all of our staff and so on. So
kind of simulations of that in a sense. It sounds like where this is the scenario, this is what we're dealing with. Imagine a world like this and okay, go do your thing, right? It's almost like the emergency evacuations for fire drills and all of those kinds of things in a building. I'm guessing on a much larger scale. And certainly with stronger consequence to how you and your team. Where is it that you think that as a leader, you were finding ways to promote initiative and get people to recognize that the courage to stand up and do the thing would be a really great step for your team members?
I would go to people in quiet moments when I'd seen them do something well on their own, and I would say, this is just one-on-one where it's just the two of us. And I would say to them, I see you in a bigger role. I don't know if that's here in the organization or somewhere else, but I know you've got a lot of growth in you and you can be bigger than you are right now. And I don't know what that is going to be for you, but I want to talk with you about it. What do you think about it? And I will tell you that every single time I had that conversation, and I had that conversation a lot because I wanted to encourage people and do it in a way as sort of like a third party, looking at their lives. I wanted to do it so that they would imagine what the world could look like and let them dream. I wasn't making it up. I definitely saw times when they stepped up or when they just said something in a meeting. That was okay. If they just had the confidence to talk about what was going on in their department. And rather than just say, thanks for giving your report, I would go to them when they had done that many times and built up the confidence to say, that's the kind of confidence you need to be a higher level manager. What do you see for yourself in this organization or in another organization? And let them go. And it's kind of funny. I had that experience with one person. He was a senior person in our communications department. And he said that when I just asked him to just dream, what do you want to do? And he said, I really want to work in sports. We were working in the electric utility industry. And he said, I really want to work in sports. He's in communications. He was accustomed to sports writing and maybe something related to video and sports and who knows. But it was not what we were doing here at the organization. And I said, wow, okay, that's different. I have a friend. And this is what I told him. I have a friend, his name's Don, and Don writes sports books. And I don't know if Don has a need for any partners or any assistance in some way, but I'll introduce you to Don, and you never know. And so I did. And it seems like I was sabotaging my own, employee,
right.
Like this slot at the company. I wasn't trying to get rid of him, but I didn't know if there was something that Matt was his name, that Matt could do on a part-time basis with Don, or maybe Don just had some ideas, who knows what. But he talked to Don, and there was something that he could do very part-time related to helping Don write books. And Don worked with famous athletes. He wrote their autobiographies. Okay. So he needed some assistance on that. And Matt started to work with Don, just on the side, a couple hours a week, and it really fulfilled that desire for him to work in sports. And he continues to do it, just a couple of hours when Don needs help. And then there was something else that even got closer to what Matt was interested in. Well, closer, I don't know, but different in that he was also interested in video. He said that. And I thought, video, how are we ever going to accomplish that? I just sort of tucked it away in my mind. And then we initiated something called a line worker competition. So if you may have heard of these things where firefighters will get together from different firehouses and they will have drills where they're competing against each other to how long does it take to put out a fire. And there are other professions that have this. Well, the electric utilities have it for line workers. How fast does it take to change those wires? To climb the poles. And again, there's other professions as well. So we started to have a line worker competition. And it was all about the line workers and creating it was all about the line workers and creating the events, the things that they would compete in to try to figure out who was the best team of line workers. And then Matt said, well, could we make video from this day where we could show it later and then people could share it with each other? I was like, hell yeah, we can. And Matt led that effort. And what was it? Was it sports? Well, kind of. It was a competition, and that's what he was really interested in. He was really interested in showing the competition and having sort of the clash of the titans and creating the storyline of it all. So we were able to keep Matt in his job, in communications, in the organization, with a contact outside where he could engage with some athletes for a couple hours, a week or a month, fine. But then he took on the responsibility of being in charge of the videos for the line worker competition. Yeah. And that really fulfilled him. And it came out of a conversation that we had of, it looks like you can move up to another level. What are you interested in? And then we shared that, and then it accomplished that goal.
Yeah, and what's really, I think, so important from a leadership perspective on that is that you wouldn't have known but for asking that these were the things that were important to him. And the introduction, yes, it might have taken him out of the organization, but I've always been one who said, you don't want someone in your organization who doesn't really dream of being there. If they don't want to be there, they're probably going to leave eventually anyway. So facilitate that shift so that you've done something that helps them achieve their dream. People remember that kind of thing. And also, it strikes me too that he started then looking for, well, if I want to do video, if I tell Barry I want to do video, maybe Barry says yes. And so it creates this opportunity within the organization. And, you mentioned the word through line earlier, and the through line seems to be sort of this hell yeah. Hell yeah, I'll try. Hell yeah, you should try, right? And so it becomes this true pattern of behavior of, if you can find a way to say yes to something, why wouldn't you, in a way? And I'm recognizing that we could talk a long time about this, and I would really enjoy that. But at the same time, I guess I'm kind of curious whether there's anything that you would want to talk about that we didn't discuss, or are there any questions that you might have?
I think the one thing that is also sort of a steady drumbeat throughout my career, but I see it everywhere, is that, I don't know, life gets boring at times and you start something and it doesn't go well and you just have to set it aside and maybe come back to it, or maybe it's not going well and you have to figure out how to make it go well. And I found that I've had to persist over time. And I think the more, I don't know, popular term today might be grit, but whatever that is, to me, it's, that means persistence, in that there's a lot of people along the way, and we've talked about this, who will just say no to things. Eleanor Roosevelt said something like, you'd be surprised how little other people think about you.
Yes.
So we think, we're the center of our universe, and no one is in that universe. Very few people are.
It could be a very lonely place, actually. Yes.
Yeah. And as a result of that, when we have an idea, we're working on a project, or, we've got a set of railroad tracks we're going down, it's completely separate from others. And if there's a little speed bump along the way, it can look like a mountain if we don't say, well, let me look at some other ways to get over this or go around. And I think that persistence is really important, because if we don't have that, then it's easy to give up. And of course, then the question is, well, at what point do you give up? Because you've put a lot of effort into it. So I don't know the answer to that question. There's
the sunk
no doubt.
Cost fallacy of the world right there, right? Where but I've invested all of this in there. Well, but why would you keep on dumping money into a lost cause, or dumping time into a lost cause? And the other thing that it makes me think about is there are times when it is appropriate to say no, or it is appropriate not to raise your hand. And I think it comes back to what we were talking about earlier. What is the goal? Where is it that you're trying to go? It's not just for how we facilitate and manage meetings. It's also how do we facilitate our lives and our careers. It becomes, what is that thing? I guess the popular term now, speaking of, is like the North Star. That's a little esoteric for my preferences, but that's what came to my mind. But it really becomes, and again, I am a perfect example, it sounds like you are too, of a person who that kept moving. It wasn't something that was the same for me throughout my career. I know people who have had a single focus, even as they changed employers. This is the direction that they wanted to go. And that's fantastic, because it's a really clear decision point. There are other people, certainly like myself, and like I say, it sounds like you as well, where we get a little bit more perspective and our goal evolves and it changes. And suddenly we're going to take an exit ramp and go on to a new highway because it seems kind of interesting to go that way. And that's now our goal. It doesn't mean the last one was a bad goal. It just means it's no longer on the list, and we've maybe completed in that space, and now we're ready to move on to the next direction. So I think it's been such a great opportunity to have this conversation with you, Barry. Thank you so much for your time today, and I'm just really appreciating that you joined me.
Thanks, Becky. It's been great talking.
If you have interest in connecting and learning more about today's guest, check out the show notes for ways to connect and follow up. Thanks for listening. If you found this episode helpful, share it with someone who could benefit from it. Until next time, I'm Becky Fraser, reminding you to integrate who you are with how you lead. Okay, bye.